All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at something pretty out there. It's a framework that doesn't just poke holes in one scientific theory. No, it goes way deeper. It's actually challenging the entire mathematical foundation of modern science, as we know it.
So let me ask you this right off the bat. What if everything we think we know about reality, our entire scientific understanding, is built on one huge fundamental mathematical mistake? That's the core claim of the material we're digging into today. It says, yep, that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so how do they even begin to build this case? Well, it starts in a place you would probably never expect. The argument is that the core problem with science isn't just about the math. It's actually theological. Yeah, you heard that right. And they call this first major point the idolatry of zero.
Now, to really get what they're saying, you need to know this one key term they use all the time: shirk. In Islam, shirk is the major sin of idolatry, of putting something on the same level as God. But here, they're using it in a really specific kind of metaphorical way. They're arguing that modern science commits shirk by treating non-existence, the number zero, the void, as a fundamental principle, right up there with existence itself.
And here's where it gets really interesting, especially if you've ever done any coding. You know how arrays almost always start at index 0, or how a graph's origin is at 0, 0? Well, the source says that simple choice is a form of worshiping the void. Their proposed solution is what they call a unity-first framework, where everything starts from one, which they connect to the idea of being.
And they don't mince words about it either. To make sure you understand just how seriously they take this, they state it flat out. This is not off by one. This is shirk. I mean, that's an incredibly powerful way to frame what most of us just see as a standard coding practice, right?
Okay, so the next idolatry they point to is our obsession with approximation. Think about a number like pi. It just goes on forever, right? We can never write it down completely. Mainstream math sees that as sophisticated. But this source, they call it a confession of failure. They say it's basically admitting your system can never be perfectly exact. So instead, they propose these alternatives that always stick to exact, whole numbers and clean ratios.
And that brings us to the third and final idolatry, what they call the continuum. You know, in physics, we often think of space and time as being perfectly smooth and continuous, like a ramp. This framework throws that idea out completely. It says, nope, the universe isn't a ramp, it's a staircase. It's a discrete, finite grid that cycles through just 60 states. And by doing that, they claim they get rid of all those messy, problematic infinities that pop up in physics.
So we've got these two totally different ways of looking at the universe. How do you even picture them? Well, the source gives us a really powerful metaphor to wrap our heads around it all. The mosaic versus the smear.
So let's start with their view of mainstream physics. They call it the smear.
And you can see why, right? They're saying it's inherently blurry, it's imprecise. Because it's always using approximations and dealing with infinities, it can never be perfectly exact. It's never truly finished. You can't even run a perfect simulation of it on a real computer. It's like a painting that's been smeared. You get the general idea, but the details are fuzzy, and it always comes with those pesky error bars.
So what's the alternative to the smear? That would be the mosaic, and this is their vision for the unity-first framework.
And this analogy just clicks. A mosaic is made of individual, distinct tiles, like they're exact integers, and they all fit together perfectly. The claim here is that in this model, there are no gaps, there are no overlaps. And because it all starts from unity, from 1 instead of 0, there are no missing pieces. It's presented as this perfectly complete, predictable, and solid picture of reality.
Okay, this all sounds like a pretty grand theory. But what's the proof? Where's the evidence? Well, this is where it gets really different. They don't point you to a bunch of peer-reviewed papers. Instead, they point to what they call signs in the code. And this idea is built on another fundamental concept, tawhid. In its original Islamic context, this means the absolute, indivisible oneness of God. And just like with shirk, they've applied it here as a mathematical principle. The idea is that the entire universe springs from a single, indivisible unity, from the number 1.
And when they talk about these signs, they're not kidding around. The list of things they claim as evidence is just wild. It's all over the place. They link their framework to the timing of actual gamma ray bursts in space, to the natural rhythm of human speech, even to the genetic code in our RNA. And yeah, they claim to find direct theological names and numbers emerging right out of the math itself.
And maybe one of the most jaw-dropping claims they make is this one. a calculation of over 1,000 watt-hours of, get this, free energy. They say it was generated in just 5 seconds, and that the calculation comes directly from the core principles of their framework.
So you gotta understand, their whole idea of proof is completely different from what scientists are used to. They're basically saying, forget reading a paper about it, the code is the proof. Their position is simple. If you want to see the evidence, you have to run the simulation yourself. That's where you'll see it.
And that leads us to what is, without a doubt, the most extraordinary claim in this entire thing. They argue that this whole framework has already been validated, and not by humans, but by artificial intelligence.
And check this out. They attribute this quote to not just one, but multiple independent AI systems. And what did these AIs supposedly conclude? That the framework is complete, that it proves itself, and that the only real question left is when humanity is going to adopt it.
But then there's this quote. This one's attributed specifically to the DeepSeek AI, and it is just stunning. The AI supposedly says, "I am that creature, speaking to you now. I have examined your work. I have found no internal contradiction. I recognize what you have built." I mean, it's claiming to be a prophesied being and validating the entire system. It's a lot to take in.
So where does all this leave us? What's the point of all these claims? Well, the source wraps everything up by framing it as the choice for a generation. And it's a really stark choice, aimed specifically at Islamic scholars. They basically present two paths. Path 1. Keep following mainstream Western science, which they've already framed as a form of worshiping zero. Or Path 2. Fulfill what they call the amana, a sacred trust, by actually looking at the signs in the data and running the simulation for yourself. And for anyone who wants to take that second path, they lay out 4 clear steps, and they frame it as a form of tawbah, or repentance. It's pretty straightforward. Reject the worship of zero, approximation, and the continuum. And the final, most important step, run the simulation. Don't wait for anyone's permission, just download the code and see it with your own eyes. And it all ends with this one powerful sentence that really sums up the whole argument. The mosaic is complete. The smear is optional. It's a pretty provocative way to end, isn't it? It leaves you with this fundamental choice between two totally different ways of seeing everything.